Hi everyone, it's patch day. Patch 2.3.1 is coming. I already covered this a few days ago in another video, but just a quick recap here. We have a bunch of little updates. For example, infinite pit keys after T70, Myriad Stone of the Horaic Jewels going to cap 2, 9 Dungeon XP globes are getting buffed and work at party now. Legion events and material reserve dungeons are getting buffed, so this might be a good way to farm materials now. A bunch of other little things like bug fixes, for example, the infinite opticide, equipment delve, butcher not dropping loot, and a bunch of other little stuff, and various build buffs here. So we have some kind of like bigger buffs to Hoda, Upheaval, Frozen Orb, Ice Shards, Golem, Necro, and Flurry, and a bunch of other like smaller buffs out here. Now, nothing is really gonna move the needle, but we do have a tier list update for max roll for you guys. So we had a meeting a few days ago and we discussed everything, and I want to walk through that with you. So while it's nice to see that Blizzard is trying to buff some of the weaker things, with the exception of Pulse, which for some reason is getting a buff as well, it is definitely well-placed buffs, but nothing is suddenly gonna become like the new meta or something like that. But it does help, I guess. Before we continue with the video, I want to give a shout out to today's sponsor, boot.dev. They've created a platform that makes it easier than ever to get into programming and polish your skills. They believe that the easiest way to learn code is to make sure that you're never bored, and this is why they have designed their courses to feel more like a game and less like a chore. The only way to really get into programming is to get your hands busy and write a ton of code, and this is exactly what the tasks allow you to do without ever feeling like you're getting stuck, because they have tons of tools to help you out. In these courses, you're going to learn backend programming from start to finish in the Python and Go languages. As you may know, programmers have huge earning potential. In the US, the median is upwards of 100K per year. And additionally, they can very often work from home, which is very convenient. And what I find really admirable about boot.dev is that they really follow their mission. Even for people that don't have the means to pay for a membership, they offer all of their content for free to read and watch. The paid membership only unlocks the interactivity and the game that goes with the programs. Compared to attending a university course, boot.dev is a way cheaper solution and allows you the flexibility of doing it all at your own pace and from home. They offer both a monthly and annual subscription, and you can cancel in the first 30 days, no questions asked. So if you really want to learn coding and that convinces you, then go check out boot.dev with the link in the description or the pinned comment below, and you get 25% off your first payment to boot.dev by clicking that link or using my code. And now, let's go back to the video. So without further ado, let's go into it. So we have our tier lists here on max roll. We went through all of them and did mostly relatively minor adjustments because our tier lists were actually in a pretty good spot. But at least on the endgame tier list here and the pit pushing, we have moved a few things because it has kind of turned out that some builds are just better than expected. Some stuff had already been moved a little bit up and down depending on what happened after the season start, with some things where we were a little bit cautious to build too high up. For example, you see here that Hydra Sorg has moved into S tier already, for example, Polarize as well. So both of these things just kind of like turned out a bit better than we had anticipated. So we didn't want to like put it up there and then potentially disappoint people, but it turns out they are actually the top tier builds out there, besides like the buggy Spiritborn stuff. And well, a few other things have moved up, especially a lot on Druid here. Druid is just kind of like performing as one of the best classes out there with Polarize and Flesh Render in S tier. Well, Polarize actually is bugged in a bad way, so there's that. And in general, it seems like all the Druid buffs that we got at the season start as compensation for the overpower changes actually really are putting in some work here. So we have a lot of really good builds and a lot of stuff moved up here. Then we have also some other slight adjustments here. For example, on the Rogue, a few things have moved up here. For example, the basic attack builds are working better than anticipated. Heartseeker, Invigorating Strike. The same goes for the Barbs as well. We already have like a few A-tier Barb builds now, where at the start of the season we had them down here because we weren't really sure how optimistic we should be about the Pain Gorger's fixes. Turns out Pain Gorger's Gauntlet is putting in a lot of work here. And we have already moved up a few things from the Barb as well. So that is actually nice. For example, I've played a lot of Lunging Strike and it's feeling really good. And a few things moved down here, especially on a Necro. We were a bit optimistic, so we moved minions down to A, for example, but it's still like one of the best builds out there. It's definitely very good to play, very comfy, but it does have its own little quirks, I guess. We also moved Bone Spear further down because it was just like really nerfed. It's clunky and so on these days. Blight also not really performing as well as we hoped. And well, this is also kind of like mostly where most of the builds land now. So as I mentioned, our tier list hasn't actually changed all that much from the season start, but we did discuss a lot. And well, this is kind of what we came up with so far. This is kind of like the representation of the clears that we have like around 2 weeks in, plus the added like buffs that we're gonna get with the patch today. So this is kind of what this looks like. It does look fairly balanced across the classes with the exception of the buggy Spiritborn stuff. But on the other hand, you know, we have really good builds up here that are definitely like a little bit ahead of the rest. But every class can reach somewhere in like the hundreds at least. Like I think the lowest class push right now is like 107, like between Rogue and Barb. And then there's like, you know, Necro at like 109 and 110 or something. And then like the Pulverize is at I think 113. So it's kind of like split in like a few pit tiers range basically. And with like Hydra Sorg just being kind of like probably the build of the season, so to say, as like the overall all-rounder here. But personally, for example, I've played around 10 different builds so far. And for example, another thing that's getting buffed is Stormclaw Druid, which would probably land somewhere here or something like that. But it's definitely something I want to try out. I have it ready and something I'm going to explore because a lot of people are always hyped for Stormclaw, and that is also getting a bit of a buff in this patch. So we'll see about that. But right now we don't actually have a build guide for it on Maxor. Maybe in the future. Then we have the speed farming builds. So I was going to go through that real quick. Not really that much moved here. We did move down some of the Spiritborn stuff here because it turns out like Sorg plus Teleport is just ridiculous. Basically every Sorg build is S tier, just like every other season before this one, to be honest. It's just that Sorg always just kind of goes extremely fast at some point, and you know, when you get to the point where any build just one-shots anything in Torment 4, well, we have a clear winner, I guess. So nothing too surprising here, but we do have, you know, for example, some other like, you know, especially Spiritborn and Rogue stuff up here that is also going really fast, one-shots everything at some point and so on. So Evade, for example, is kind of like, you know, the farming and progression build there that also doesn't need like giga high-end gear, like, you know, something like this or this here to perform at a similar pace. So this is just kind of like a more kind of like starter-friendly build as well, has a smooth progression curve where most of the Sorg stuff is like very late game stuff with like Shaco, triple masterwork, cooldown, and these kind of things. But yeah, overall, we do have a bunch of really fast builds out there. Lunge here, Cataclysm there, even with the nerfs, it just kind of blasts through everything at some point. And then there's a lot more other stuff to choose from. Overall, I think there's a pretty good variety of builds. If you want to, like, for example, grind out Paragons, grind out the Glyphs, you just, you know, keep finding the pit at some point, or escalation dungeons and these kind of things. There's plenty to choose from that feels pretty good, I think. And for the bossing tier list, well, it turns out T4 has been quite nerfed, and basically most of these builds eventually get to the point where they just kind of like insta-kill Belial, or very close to that at least, on T4. So it was a bit tough to really move stuff around here, but we decided to kind of be a bit more on the optimistic side, and we mostly rank these builds by how easy is it to get to the point to one-shot Belial on Summon 4, basically. So obviously, you know, some strong builds do that with very little gear, and then, you know, basically the further down you go, the more you have to like try and invest a little bit. But yeah, as I said, eventually almost everything gets to the point where all of the T4 lab bosses are not really a problem, at least when you're like decked out with Masterworks, maybe some Mythics and so on. So thanks to how much easier Blizzard has made Torment 4, a lot of builds suddenly get into this territory, and eventually it doesn't really matter what you play, as long as you have some decent setup. So yeah, here's like our tier list for bossing. And you can also usually find like some kind of like bossing variations or so if that is relevant for those guides here when you open them. And with that, we mostly conclude the tier list updates. So as I mentioned, it is looking actually like a pretty good variety. I gotta say, I'm having a blast with the variety of good and fun builds that we have across all classes. And, you know, even playing something from like down here, for example, I played a bunch of Razorwing Spiritborn, and even that felt really good, and was like speed farming tier 75 pits and something like that. So you actually have a lot of different builds to choose from here these days. And, you know, even down here, you can play stuff that feels pretty good. So I do have to say that's a pretty good job here by Blizzard. Obviously, some builds are somewhat overtuned, like all this stuff here, or buggy. So this is what it is. So if you want to have a very easy time, you can play these. And otherwise, you know, like A tier is also like, you know, perfectly fine to just blast through everything in the game easily without crazy investment. So overall, I think that they have really like opened up the meta a bit, opened up the possibilities of different builds. Druid is looking very good and fun. So lots of good stuff, I think. Obviously, as always, I'm gonna keep you guys updated if there's any other developments. Right now, I don't really expect another like large patch or so. Blizzard has kind of shifted their priorities a bit from like the mid-season patches that really shake up a lot of things to just the early season patches. So we just got a week 2 patch. Maybe there's gonna be another week 3 patch, and then that's roughly about it. So for example, I don't really expect the Spirit Bomb bugs to get fixed here, and this is gonna remain like, you know, some pretty broken stuff until the end of the season, most likely. And who knows, maybe they're gonna do some other tweaks on like underperforming builds, but we already have like a relatively large variety. So I guess they're mostly cooking season 10 at this point. But if there's anything coming up, I'll let you know. Otherwise, I have a bunch of stuff coming out for more build guides. I've played a lot of stuff that I still want to show off to you guys. So stay tuned for that. Hope you enjoyed this video and see you guys next time.